Housing prices keep going up. Everyone is mad about affordability. So, why do big city politicians keep making things worse? My guest has an answer. Welcome to a special bonus episode of the Reason Roundtable. This is your libertarian review of news and culture. It's not a full-size roundtable, it's just a table for two. I'm Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by Reason's very own Christian Britschgi, master of housing policy. You read a lot about this stuff. Why the rent is so damn high is kind of a question that you are constantly answering here. And this is a topic that is increasingly central to our political debates about affordability, about the economy, and even about the capitalist system itself. And part of the answer, I think that you the argument that you make consistently here is that rent control keeps failing. But politicians keep trying it anyway. Zoran Mamdani is pushing it in New York. City Council just voted for further rent regulations in Los Angeles. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what's going on in Los Angeles specifically?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So Los Angeles has a legacy rent stabilization ordinance passed in 1978, I believe. And what this does is it gives the city the power based on some sort of formula to set allowable rent increases at generally units built before 1978. What the city did this past week was they passed an ordinance changing that formula. Previously, it had allowed increases of between 3 and 8% based off some percentage of annual inflation. The new formula allows for increases of 1 to 4% based off some percentage of inflation, and then also eliminates some other avenues by which landlords could raise rents higher. Well, they could pass on increasing costs of utilities. They could raise rents if you had another tenant move into the same unit, things like that. So it was across the board just a general reduction in the ability that landlords will have to raise rents over time.
So a lot of people are going to look at this. Voters are going to look at this and they're going to say, well, the problem is that rents keep going up. They're too high already. And this is just an action that is going to make it more difficult to raise rents even further. Isn't this going to make rent cheaper in Los Angeles?
Directly, yes, it will. If you live in a rent-stabilized unit, this law this new ordinance, which, there's still several steps that have to happen before it formally goes into effect. But, yeah, this new ordinance, it will restrict the pace at which your rent can increase. On the down, but there are, of course, lots of trade-offs with that. Landlords, if you restrict prices, you put a price ceiling on something, you'll get less investment. The research is very clear on this. So, landlords might, upkeep their properties less. They will most likely, it'll also have a negative impact on housing construction because of a tweak of how LA's rent stabilization laws work. So basically, right now, if you buy a rent-stabilized property and the zoning maybe allows you to redevelop it into more units, you have to put all those new units under rent stabilization as well. And so you're less likely to undertake a project like that if, the rent increases that you would be able to, charge on, your new, speculative project are much less. The research is abundantly clear. Rent control takes many different forms, but to the degree it controls prices, it reduces investment. And what you lose when you have less investment is you lose either some form of housing supply or you lose some form of housing quality because people invest less in their buildings. And so LA can expect those results. And I should add, too, that LA, for 4 years beginning in the pandemic, LA froze rents at rent-stabilized apartments, there's about 650,000 rent-stabilized units in Los Angeles. So the rent has already been, on these units, the rent has already been held even for, the past 4 years. And now they're coming and, they're letting rents rise slightly, but under this new, more restrictive formula. So, this has been, and meanwhile, costs of operating these units continue to increase. Insurance costs go up, building material costs have gone up, all sorts of things like that. So, when you have rising operating costs and then, rent increases that are held below inflation, something is going to give eventually. So.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what's happening in New York, because I think in a way that it is connected, right? You also wrote recently about a lawsuit in New York in which landlords say that a rent control law is forcing them to keep apartments empty. Essentially, it's creating thousands and thousands of what people have called ghost apartments. What's this lawsuit about? How does this work?
Yeah, sure. So, to contrast the two cities' laws, LA, while it's tightened its formula for increasing rents, it does have this, by state law, it has what's called vacancy decontrol, which means that when one tenant moves out, and before the next one that moves in, you can raise your rents to market rates. This is really important policy because it allows you to keep pace with market, which attracts some level of investment, allows property owners to renovate an apartment that's maybe been lived in for decades. New York used to have a system like this. It got rid of it in 2019, and so now if one tenant moves out and another one moves in, you get no allowable bonus for increasing rents. And so if the rents on your old tenant have been held by the city regulations at 1%, 2% for years or decades. A tenant moves out, you want to go in there and do a lot of repairs and renovations, often legally mandated repairs and renovations. That can cost a lot of money, sometimes upwards of $100,000. Under the city's new rules, post-2019 rules, you basically can't pass on almost any of those costs in the form of higher rent increases. And so what happens is you have landlords who have units that were a long-time tenancy. Someone moves out. They have no ability to perform these legally mandated renovations and then recuperate the costs. And so it's makes more business sense for them to just not rent out the apartment anymore. And therefore you have units that are, vacant and off the market, rent stabilized units. There's tens of thousands of these units that are in this situation right now. And yes, so to get to the lawsuit, if I can, so some landlords are now suing, saying that this is an effective taking of their property, that, they're in the business of renting out units. These laws make it impossible for them to do that. They're getting no economic value from these vacant units. And so therefore the government has, via regulation, seized their property and not compensated for them, which is, of course, against the Constitution.
So you think about the sort of the socialists, the democratic socialists who favor rent control. You see this all over in big, expensive cities. And so much of their argument is landlords, developers, the people who build housing and who operate housing, they're bad because they want profit out of this. Mm-hmm. But what you're saying is that profit is an incentive to fix the problem with housing, which is too little supply, right? Because this is so, if you think about the YIMBY, NIMBY argument here, the yes in my backyard folks who want to build more housing, their fundamental argument is prices are too high for housing because there is too little supply. And so what you need to do is bring more supply online. And what you're pointing to with both of these actions, the city council in Los Angeles, the lawsuit here over these rules in New York, these are rules that make it much more expensive to either build new housing or renovate existing housing or operate housing as a landlord. And when there is less profit and less incentive, therefore, to do so, then you get essentially the situation that we have had that created this mess. You get it becomes exacerbated because there is less housing supply, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you hold, the estimates vary, but, in New York's, 25,000, rent stabilized apartments are vacant and not available for rent. So if you hold, those units off the market, that's, a reduction in supply, which you can assume is going to raise prices to the degree they're allowed to increase on other units.
I think I saw it was 50,000 units are ghost apartments now because of this.
Yeah, so there's some varying estimates and disagreement about exactly how to count these units. People like to say capital is liquid, right? So if you reduce the, ability for profit in housing, it's investors will, put their money somewhere else. They'll buy treasury bills or they'll buy stocks or whatever else, right? And if you want the, if Bernie Sanders or, Zohran Mamdani want the millionaires and the billionaires to pay for things, including housing, it's they would if you allowed them to profit off of them, but these rules increasingly prevent them from doing so, and therefore they'll invest less. You saw this after the 2019 law passed, and a process that continually is playing out is just the value of the rent-stabilized housing stock is just continued to plummet to the point of where, you're having all sorts of problems with, the banks that lent to these buildings are, not able to are, endangered because they, the value of the investment has fallen so much. So yeah, if you don't allow people, and even nonprofits who are not trying to even turn a profit, but are operating these units, trying to operate these units, like even they are having financial struggles as well. So like at the end of the day, like housing costs money to provide. Even if you like try to squeeze out the profits, like you still need some level of rent to pay for some level of operating and financing costs. And even when the nonprofits in New York are failing to recuperate their costs, this shows that you have like a very serious problem and a just huge divestment in housing as a result of these price controls.
Landlords are good. Developers are good. Okay, maybe not every landlord, maybe not every developer, but like the act of being a landlord, the act of being a developer, it's good. And profit is good because it brings more people into the business and makes housing more plentiful and thus cheaper. You heard it here first, folks. Landlords and profit are actually good. That's what we need more of. Politicians just don't seem to understand this. All right, thank you all for watching Table for Two. For more bonus segments like this one, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check back regularly. If you'd like us to answer one of your questions, we do sometimes do that on this show, send your short, succinct, pithy, and not very long actual question to podcasts@reason.com. That is podcasts@reason.com. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon.